if you feel like UI design and user experience work is just not your thing, it's not what you do, it's not what you're good at, or you don't feel like it's something you're good at, go ahead and sit down. Okay, cool. For the people sitting down, take a look at everyone else. These are the people that at least have some opinions on this stuff. Let's do one more filtering. If you're not a user experience practitioner, if it's not your job specifically to design user interface, to research users, to test user interface, go ahead and sit down. So what we're left with are the honest, the actual user experience practitioners. They may not be that by job title, but they are that by what they do. I need to know who these people are because these are the people that can detect if I'm lying or not. You should know who they are because, well, you should talk to them in the halls about some of this stuff. And they can tell you where I was lying and where I'm not. All right, that is kind of what I expected, but go ahead and sit down. That's great. I know a little bit about who's in the room, and I expected that this was going to be a fairly development-heavy crowd. And my goal is that you walk out understanding a bit more about user experience. So let me give you a bit about me. I became a software developer accidentally. I started in the early 80s in art school. Specifically, then it was called communications art. I focused on design, illustration, advertising design, and I found out it was a lot of hard work. I had to spend a lot of hours every week doing this stuff. And one of the worst things was showing up multiple mornings a week with an assignment I completed and putting it on the wall with everyone else and surviving a morning critique. In a morning critique, we all judged each other's work and the professor judged our work. It was, I thought I had done a good job. It was but it was more subjective than I wanted it to be. So I had to put in a lot of hard work, and it was tough. And what I had to look forward to after 4 years of university in art was a really crappy paying job that was going to be hard for me to get. And in contrast, computer science seemed pretty straightforward. The assignments, at least for me, were fairly easy, and they were black and white. I was given assignments. I could get the code to work. The code did work, and, I was done. That was it. So I went deeper into software development. After about a decade of distraction, I finally ended up as a professional software developer, and I found that as a professional software developer, I was a real rock star. I found that I had this ability, where a lot of other developers struggled, given a general idea of what the software could do, where they had trouble, I could go straight from generally understanding what it should do to how it should look and feel and behave, and I could make it look pretty good. In fact, I was pretty proud of it. They were pretty impressed with it. My whole company was super impressed with the kind of work I could do, and everything was great until I shipped the software. Has anyone in the room ever sat with a customer or user after you've shipped your product? Just wonderful. Good to see so many hands. Tell me how that goes. Can you give me a few adjectives for that? I want you to shout out and try and shout louder than that guy next door. So, what are some adjectives for the way that goes? Frustration. Embarrassment. What the heck is this? Perfect. I saw a hand. Surprise. Enlightenment. Yeah. At a cost. Anything else? Hesitation? Is that what I heard? It's a painful experience, and this is where you really learn. And suddenly, this is where I realized that software development was not at all like I thought it was in university. Software development felt a lot more like those design critiques that I used to do in art class that I did not like. I had to show up every morning, and well, it was very subjective, and well, this was hard, harder than I thought it was. And it was going to take a lot more work to get right. And throughout the 90s, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of work to get it right. There's a lot of work I did to understand who users were and what they needed, and well, there's a lot to it. In 2000, I was lucky enough to join I joined a first extreme programming project. The startup I was working for in San Francisco had hired a guy named Kent Beck, who had just written this book called Extreme Programming Explained. And he was our consultant and our coach. And I joined that team, and I really loved extreme programming, which subsequently became one of these agile processes. But something really bugged the crap out of me. It was missing that big chunk that I had gotten good at throughout the 90s, that big chunk that helped us figure out exactly what it was we should build and to make it good. And it had replaced all that work or all that rigor I put in with one simple strategy, and that was ask someone else what to build. And the ask someone else in the role of a customer, well, it took more work than that. And extreme programming had advised hiring customers that were experts, people that really knew. And I had learned the hard way that thinking I really knew didn't work so well. So it's been throughout the 2000s that I've tried to, well, I've embraced agile development, but I've been working from within to try and change what agile development is to be something a bit more like what I was doing in the 90s, erasing all the bad things that I was doing that agile development helps me with, and putting back all the good things that help me get good software. User experience is a huge part of that, but certainly not the only part. So here's what we're going to, this is the first talk of the day on user experience, and I'm hoping to set, well, lay down a little bit of groundwork. First thing I want you to understand is that, well, being user-centric is unnatural. It is not the way we generally work. It's not the way we think about something, and the first thing you've got to do is break a lot of bad habits. How many of you are architects and like to do things right? UX design is a lot bigger than you think it is, or at least I want you to see it as having a bigger scope and casting a wider net than you think it is. It isn't just the UI design. And really designing with discipline, well, is difficult. It's more than you think it is there as well. So I want you to understand, well, aside from user centricity, what design discipline is. And then finally, we've got to end with something that gives you, well, something to do. Over the past decade, since I've declared that I care a lot about this user experience thing, and I've dug in and studied, I've been able to see a lot of growth and change in this area. As people have adopted agile development, as teams have come together, I've seen a new kind of user experience practice emerge that is bigger, more inclusive, that allows everyone to be a designer, starting to feel a lot more like the stuff that I had done in the 90s. So let's start with the first thing. Has anyone ever heard of a clothing brand called FUBU before? Gosh, more people here. Well, FUBU's a fairly interesting story, but it gives sort of a concept to be familiar with. FUBU is a clothing brand. It was started by a group of African Americans in New York who were sitting around one day and noticed that most of the clothing they were wearing was designed by European designers. And they said, well, we should be able to design the kinds of clothes we wear. We shouldn't have to go shop for it elsewhere, so we should start a brand, and we'll call the brand FUBU. And FUBU, there's lots of stories about what it actually stands for, but most people commonly believe it stands for us, by us. So these guys got together, designed a clothing brand, and the image of FUBU, this is an older, grainy ad. I couldn't find a higher resolution picture, but when some of these older ads really show the kind of image they were portraying, the kind of person they were designing for. It was people, well, kind of like them. Over time, FUBU as a brand grew and became more popular, and well, FUBU has opened stores in Asia, and the kinds of people that wear FUBU clothing today aren't at all like the people, well, they aren't us, at least not the us that founded the company, and it became harder and harder for these folks to, well, to identify with who was using their product, and no one ever anticipated the kinds of people that would eventually start wearing these clothes. Now, most software products fall into the category of FUBU design, and that's a good way to design. If it's your itch you're scratching, you can be pretty sure you've scratched it. And a lot of the very best products we used are built by people for themselves, or people like themselves. It's arguable that a lot of what we love about Apple products falls into the category of FUBU design. It's a different kind of user centricity. Now, the design that I was seeing in agile processes falls into a category of what I'll call, well, for me, by you. For me, by you design falls in the category of, well, I know what I want, and I will just ask you to build it, and we'll find someone smart and just ask them what we want, and then we'll be puzzled at why they keep changing their mind and why they don't seem to know what they want. But at least at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to know. And eventually, when all things start to fail, we fall back into the old making things up kind of design process. And that's where we start to fall into. So a lot of people claim to be user-centric, but there's a few common failure modes. The first one is declaring that you care about users, and basically deciding if I like it, so will they. And that's a bit of a variation of the FUBU design, but, well, if you're not the user, I've designed software that's used by nurses and doctors and stock traders, and, well, I'm not a nurse or a doctor or a stock trader. And whether I like it or not starts to be irrelevant. But I see a lot of that, and I hear a lot of people arguing about, well, whether I would use it and whether I like it. And a lot of times when I hear the comment that that's not usable or users won't like that, what I hear is, I don't like that. It doesn't feel usable to me. The other failure mode we commonly see is, I care a lot about users, well, and that's why I ask them directly what they want, and I can't help it if they make bad choices. That's the other failure mode for user centricity. So true user centricity, or this idea of user-centered design, places users at the focus and recognizes that we aren't the users. We don't know who they are, and we have to understand who they are, and we're not going to rely on them to self-diagnose. We're the software developers, we're the people who create the product, and, well, we kind of need to behave a bit more like doctors and a little less like waiters. It's not our job to take their orders, it's our job to understand and honestly help. It turns out the easiest way to do that is to go there. Gemba is a Japanese word. Actually, I was in Japan 3 weeks ago now, and I do hear people use the word a little bit more commonly. Has anybody heard that term Gemba before? It loosely translates into the real place, or the scene of the crime, or, well, where things happen, or where it really happened. So pretend for a minute that you're Jane Goodall, Are you pretending? Imagine being Jane Goodall, and somebody says to you, comes up to you, and well, basically you've been a chimp researcher for a long time, or you've researched apes, and you spend a lot of time out in the field understanding them. And someone comes up to you and says, Jane, I've got a technique that is really going to save you a lot of time. It's called chimpanzee on site. And we'll bring the chimps to you and put them right next to your desk. And whenever you've got a problem, something you're trying to figure out, you just turn to the chimp and watch the chimp sitting right next to your desk. That'll help. That's not the kind of, that's not actual. That doesn't work very well. What we're shooting for is actually seeing the way users work or the way people work in context where they're at. And for me, in the 90s, it turned out that was a real secret to me doing things. There's an old Woody Allen joke, and probably derived from a Groucho Marx joke, which probably could be traced back into some ancient Greek text. But 90% of life is just being there. And as it turns out, when it comes to this user experience work, 90% of doing the right thing comes from the empathy you get by just being there. Everything else we do piles on top of it, but if you never go there, that causes a lot of challenge. So throughout the 90s, I spent a lot of time just showing up. I used to build software for retailers, brick and mortar retailers, large chain stores. So I spent a lot of time watching people work, sitting with them, having me teach them their jobs. I have done work with stock traders, and so I've done a lot of work hanging around with equity traders and other types of traders as they work, and saw their environment and saw what it's like to work there. The important thing about this particular picture, this is a group of they trade for an active fund at a company called BGI, Barclays Global Investors, and they're in San Francisco. The really important thing about this is to look out the window and see how dark it is. It's important for you to know that I got up at 5 a.m. in the freaking morning to watch these guys start, because that's when the market opens, or that's when they have to get there to start work to understand it. And I've spent time with traders at 5 and 6 a.m. I've spent time with doctors and nurses after midnight as they use medical records, and that's the kind of empathy you have to get. That's the empathy that it's hard to substitute for. I built a lot of software for brick and mortar retailers. This is a chain of paint stores in the United States called Benjamin Moore. There are 3,000 plus of these, and they were a customer of mine. And I found that a ton of the assumptions that we had made, and even that they had made, fall apart when people are behind the counter actually talking to people, and things, and until we went actually into context, things didn't work. So user centricity starts with being there, and it's being there not to capture requirements, but to build understanding and to build empathy. Now, I want you to understand, let me lay down a few more concepts here. That when I talk about user experience and what that means, I mean more than just user interface design. It's a little bit bigger than that. I'm going to start with a model that I've been talking about a lot lately, and it turns out to be it has a couple important concepts in it that, we all need to understand and leverage, and it matters an awful lot. For me, it starts to be a root of design thinking. So the first thing you need to understand is that we don't build software. Our job is to change the world. Does that sound like a big thing? It's good, you're listening. It turns out this is a relatively simple thing to do. So here's a basic change the world model, and there's just 3 vocabulary terms in here that I need you to listen for. This is the way this works. We start with the world today, and by going out there, we watch people work and do things, and we find people that are unhappy, and people that are confused, and people that may be angry. And it's watching those people and gaining some understanding and empathy that gives us some ideas. Now, ideas come into our company via a lot of different mechanisms. They come in via complaints and market research and other things, but all of those are in response to what we see in the world. And we express those ideas as new products or features to add to our products. We start describing those to other people, and we'll use terms like specifications, and we'll use terms like requirements. I'm going to go off on just a little bit of a tangent here. Throughout the 90s, I managed to get by in software development with a product company that started with 30 or so people, grew to a couple hundred people, and we managed to get by without, well, we rarely or almost never used the word requirement. It was when we started growing and hiring more traditional software developers that the word started coming up. And I remember working with somebody who came to me and said, we need you to add something to the part of the product you're working on. It's a feature and it needs to do this. And I said, well, that's great. I think we can fit that in. And tell me a little bit more about who's using it and what they're doing and what problems this solves for them. And she looked at me as though I wasn't listening. And she said, well, no, I need you to get these features in. And I said, yeah, I get it. Just tell me a little bit more about who's using it and what problems this solves. And she says, well, it's a requirement. And that's when I learned that the word requirement means shut up. And, well, that's what we use, or that's what we call the decisions we make about what to build when we want people to stop asking us stupid questions. At times, now the word requirement isn't bad, it's just at times the way we use it can shut down conversation about context, shut down conversation about the problems we're trying to solve with our software, which is at the root of this whole design idea. Now let's get back to this story. Given some understanding of what we're going to build, we need to go to work and start building it. And it's at the end of this process we end up with this nifty ta-da moment where we deliver some piece of working software. And where we deliver that software is into this future world. It's this new world where what we hope to be true is that those people that were unhappy before are now happy. And, well, some are less happy than other people. And some people you just can't please, and they're still unhappy, and maybe we didn't mean to make them happy, but something different always happens. You know, just like I had said, if you've been there when you launch your software, it never goes as expected. So here's the vocabulary words. Everything, well, between that idea and between the shipment, all that stuff we do, I'm going to call that output. That's what we build. If you're in an agile process, that's what's in the burn down chart. That's output. You're building lots of output. And we know how much we get. We measure how much we get. We get very concerned about if we're getting all of our output on time and all of our output on budget. But it's not the output that we really want. Well, we're concerned about it because we want what happens after. What happens after is what people do differently in the world now that we put our product into it. What happens after is what I'm going to call outcome. Things that happen, well, there are some outcomes that we can see right away. If I was working with a .com, let's say I was with eBay and I had an idea for something that combined the success of Groupon with what I do in eBay, so I could list things myself, sell them myself on eBay, but they had a deep discount and a timed offering, and they were regional in the same way that a Groupon thing is. We could build that feature, and then hours, and at most days after, we could see how people behaved, and they'd behave differently, and we could measure what happens. In contrast, if what I was shooting for was improved customer satisfaction, or an increase in brand loyalty, or if I was trying to gain ground against competitors in a particular market, I don't measure that an hour or a day after delivery. I have to measure that months out, sometimes years out. Those things, or that kind of benefit, I'm going to refer to as impact. That's hard stuff. It's difficult to measure, and I can only see it after a release, and it's hard to attribute any one feature, one release to it. Now, I spend a lot of time in the agile world, and these things are what we call business value. And oftentimes we talk a little bit abstractly about it, but what we're going to see is that people who are good at this stuff are pretty specific about it. They talk specifically about how behavior changes in the world afterwards. Now, here's the punchline. We spend a buttload of time in software development trying to figure out how to get more output, when in fact, our job is to figure out how to get less output. Our job in software development is to minimize our output and maximize our outcome and impact. And we can only do that by understanding the world as it is today and imagining or projecting ourselves into the future. There's this nifty little mechanism called a user story, and there's a common... who in the room is using agile software development? Is this now starting to be almost everybody? Who in the room has hands? Just checking. Yeah, some of the people not doing agile don't have hands, so that could account for it. But there's a common user story format that follows this template. As a type of user, I want some sort of feature or product or idea so that I get some benefit. And, well, for me, it stamps really clearly into identifying who is using our product, what it is they want, and the change that I expect to see, the outcome that I expect to see. And that's the part we have to understand. This becomes our design target. This is the root of design. It's understanding the change that we're bringing about that compels us to build this what or this thing. So there's, well, that leads into one other model I want you to grab, to understand. I oftentimes draw this pyramid. I draw it a lot on napkins, so I thought it would be best to just photograph one of the napkins. This is a simple pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid is utility. It means if I'm trying to accomplish something and you've built a product that helps me do it, that product has some measure of utility. So the product supports doing something that I'm trying to do, and that's good. At the next level above, we've got usability. That means I can use the product. It's easy, relatively easy to learn how to use, quick to remember how to use it, and well, how effectively I can use it starts to be a function of usability. And then finally at the top, we've got this aesthetics thing, how pretty it is, how sexy it is, how I feel using it, the brand impression I get from looking at it. These things build on top of each other. If I've got to get the utility right. If I understand the world as it is today and how crappy it is, and we want to shoot for something better, it's making the choices about what to build is where user experience starts. And a lot of those choices aren't always made by user experience practitioners. Getting utility right will make people reasonably happy. Getting the usability right on top of that will make people a bit happier. And then finally, getting the aesthetics right on top of that will make people generally really happy. If I look at this model, there's a lot of examples of, well, just getting the utility right. Products like Craigslist are good examples of that. Craigslist has a Swedish version. Are people familiar with what Craigslist is? It's, got the utility. It's reasonable from a usability perspective. It certainly is not sexy. It's raw utility, and it works pretty well, and it scratches an itch. It solves a problem. Now, there are examples of products that it's hard to find examples of products that hit the usability and aesthetics part but don't get the utility because, well, they die. No one wants them or no one can use them. But the only product that keeps coming up for me is one that hits that is This is a product that came onto the market, and apparently the people who built it have limitless cash, so they're able to keep promoting it and keep working to try and find uses for this product. But the big problem is it just does not scratch anyone's itch. It doesn't solve any real problems. How many people here, I'm curious, I've never ridden a Segway. How many people here have ridden a Segway before? Of those people, how many of you own a Segway? Gosh, I don't know. just isn't working so well. So it's a perfectly good device for someone who needs to go someplace not very fast with no one else and no stuff to carry. Now that's okay, and it only is going to cost you 7,000 US to do it if you get a deal. But they've been working hard to try and find uses for these things, and I don't know, but these guys just don't look threatening. When I look for examples or reviews on Segways, lots of them say it's kind of fun, but I look like an idiot. And there was an article recently that said 10 Segway alternatives that don't make you look like a tool. Well, a tool is a derogatory U.S. expression for another part of the anatomy that these guys look like. Finally, if you just hit that aesthetics thing, and this is where most people fall short, is they look at user experience design as, well, that's the cosmetics, and the most common anti-pattern is our software looks like hell. Can you come in and make it look good? There's a common term for this, for the UI people in the room. When you're asked to make the software look better, is there a term for that here in Europe? Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. It's lipsticking the pig. At the end of the day, it certainly looks better than it did. But it doesn't necessarily solve a problem well, and it isn't easy to learn, and it looks sexy doing nothing. There's a bunch of concerns that are called user experience. The making choices about what to build is a big one. And in the user experience world, you'll find specialists, lots of people that are focused on specific areas. So for everyone else in the room that's not a user experience person, I want you to get this vocabulary part. Someone in the UX world that focuses on understanding users and making choices about what to build and doing some high-level user interface design is often referred to as an interaction designer. And there's a term information architect that is still around, still being used, and that comes more from the early web world. But these are people that aren't necessarily good with color. They're not good with visual design. They're not good with making things look pretty. And a lot of people make the mistake of hiring one of these people to lipstick the pig, and they can't do that so well. What they can do well is tell you you've made bad choices about what to build. And this is why people want to fire them, usually. The next level up of specialty are people like usability engineers. Usability engineers within this user experience space, they're like testers in a traditional software space. They focus on what has been built or what's been prototyped and evaluating whether it is usable or easy to use. The people that do this the best have this personality for measuring, for being somewhat sciencey, for putting together tests that evaluate how effectively people can use something, how many people accomplish work using it, how many people fail and where they fail, and what we could do about it. And then finally, the people that land on the top end up being visual designers, sometimes fine-grained UI designers. They end up being a bit more technical, and a lot of people that I run into that are really good visual designers came from print media. They came from designing things that were, well, like I went to college for in the 80s. They're good at the aesthetics and the way things look, but a lot of them don't necessarily care much about who the user is or why they're doing what they're doing. The choices about what to build weren't, well, they're not into making those choices, not so much. Finally, I might add to the utility part, I find people that are pure researchers, people that are ethnographic researchers that that work to understand who users are and how they work. And I find a lot of them that, well, they focus on that research part, so even making decisions about what should be built isn't necessarily their thing. So if you're new to the UX world, you'll find that there's a lot of different specialties swimming around there, and they're very, very different people with different personalities. And going to several conferences, I find these people don't always get along with each other, and there's a lot of infighting between different groups. A lot of disagreement on exactly how things should work. Now, that's how this user experience space works. Let's talk about design as a discipline. And I'm going to pull it down north if I don't get cooking. But design by itself is a word that applies to lots of different things. There's a book out there that I like called How Designers Think. It was written by someone who runs the architecture department of the University of Sheffield in England. He defines research as understanding the world as it is, analysis as making sense of the world, and design as imagining the world differently than it is. So the act of design applies to redecorating your house, to business process design, to making choices about what to build, to making choices about exactly the way it looks, and to making aesthetic choices about how it looks. But there's a discipline to how we approach design, no matter what it is we're designing. Now, here's an overly simplified view of what design thinking should look like. It starts with some measure of understanding the problem and the constraints or the context you're working in. It starts with understanding those people and going there and putting some rigor into that. And the next step is to then, once I understand and I get some focus, I decide what it is, what problems I want to solve, the next bit of rigor is to brainstorm, to come up with lots of possible solutions, or to ideate. This is one area we particularly stink at, and our goal here is to come up with lots of possible solutions. The next step is to then start to look at our best possible solutions, start to combine and refine, and to actually put them in front of people, let them see them and really evaluate. It's not to self-evaluate because we're not our users. We don't know. And our empathy may allow us to filter out some bad choices early, but even still, putting them in front of people is good iteration. And, well, in the agile world, we use the word iterate a lot, but I keep running into people that think that iterate means repeat the same process over and over. And that changing the product we just built, that's called rework. So iterate gets a bit of a bad name. And then finally, if we're doing some kind of rigor with this design process, we end up with a plan. And best plans allow us to keep learning as we're building, to break things down into smaller releases that we can learn something from. So one of the things I get super excited about is all the stuff going on with the lean startup community that prioritizes learning as one of the highest outcomes of doing something. We're starting to see the real marrying of design thinking, user experience thinking, product thinking, starting to come together in what gets referred to as lean startup today. Now, to do this with some measure of rigor, I actually have to, well, this is an example of something called, well, I used to do this throughout the 90s, and what I used to do was go out to where people were working and sit with them while they worked, have them show me how to work. It was in the 2000s that I realized what I was doing was called contextual inquiry. I just thought it was watching people. But I'm behind the camera, and this is us getting up early again to work with somebody in finance at a bank. And he's teaching Don, that guy, how to do his job, and Catherine is taking notes. And we find that when you watch somebody work, you see all the things that they didn't tell you about. I'm finding that people are doing a lot more of that now. Well, I'll run back together in just a minute and we'll do a quick rundown of all the possible practices. But hey, let's see if we can do this in 3 minutes. I want to talk about this ideation thing, and you guys have all been really patient. And I also, at the very last minute, told people to print some stuff for me. Does everybody see those pictures right there? These handouts here that have a bunch of circles on them. If you don't have one, if you can get a blank sheet of paper, that would be cool. Now, if you've got a pen, get a pen. If you don't have a pen, steal a pen. I want you on the very first circle to draw a line and 2 dots. I don't know if you can see that. That's a smiley face. Do that, please. We're going to get some slightly uncomfortable silence for a minute here. Now, I would like you, as fast as you can, to fill the rest of those circles with really interesting faces. In about 2 minutes, do that. Go. And try not listen to the guy next door. Now, if you get stuck, the trick to some creativity is to start to combine. Think about professions like astronauts and lawyers and lion tamers. Think about other contexts like the jungle or space or a city. And don't look at that little girl. She's not yet. Think about vegetables like pumpkins and apples, and those types of things help you come up with, help you combine. Now, you're going to have to show your work to somebody in a minute, so for those of you who have stopped drawing, keep it up. If you've finished, I'm waiting for maybe one person to finish, or a couple people to finish, throw up a hand. Get at least a couple rows done. Anybody done with the whole page yet? Ah, good. All right. In the interest of time, let's time out. Stop for a second. Now the hard part. Can you hand what you did, well, to the person on your right, or at least the person on your right that did the exercise. Find somebody else to trade with quickly. Now, person on the right, you're an evaluator. Your job is to look at these really interesting faces and decide which one you think is the best, and put a little star by the one that you like the best. Once you've done that, hand it back. Okay, I'm seeing lots of them go back. First question that's kind of sideways here is, how many people, when you look at what someone else chose, how many people agree that that's the one that they would have chosen themselves? Just you? Just a few? So there's a weird quirk about evaluation. Self-evaluation never works the same as someone else evaluating. It's tough to get on the same page about what we're evaluating and why something is good. That's sideways. That's interesting information. And he's done. I'm going to have to pull this together quickly. For how many people had one of their best chosen that was in the first 5 they drew? How many people in the first 10? How many people greater than 10? How many? So yeah, not a lot. So many people are missing hands again here. But this is what I mean by ideation. Ideation means coming up with lots of starting points, and we forget to do this and forget to do it well. That's my daughter, and the truth is I can give her a sheet of these and she can finish it twice as fast as you guys can, and she'll ask for another sheet and keep doing it. We seem to have that bred out of us, and in a business context, we've learned to stop doing that. Now, we're at 10:50, and let's see if I can pull this together a little bit. So, rigor with design means actually pausing and stopping to ideate. Rigor with design means actually pausing and stopping to test. What these people are doing is they're working with a paper prototype. These people are with Hewlett-Packard, and they're testing a fairly complex user interface that maps. Well, they work with a StorageWorks division that maps logical disk units to physical disk units. And the guy on the right, he's a computer. And in front of him is his memory. And the person on the left, well, she's a user. And this is her mouse. And she's using the product and trying to accomplish something. Really evaluating software is more than just show and tell. It's actually looking at it. And really evaluating doesn't require actually build something. So having some rigor in a design phase to prototype is part of design rigor. And then finally, on that planning part, rigor there means creating plans that allow you to keep learning as your software gets more and more built. So a guy named Alan Cooper that I know that says everything is a prototype until it ships. And all we're doing as we build software is increasing the fidelity on our prototype. And we got to keep testing as we go. See if I can tie this together now and talk about the way that people are working today. When I see designers going into agile development, they've got challenges with the size that we design at. They think of design in human-sized chunks, what people normally do. They think of, designers often have battles with others over what should be built or what those utility decisions are. Oftentimes working with users reveals that they need something different than the requirements say we need. And designers, one of the problems designers have is that they don't have code to work with. They lack a common language for the way that they work and talk with each other. And design has this quality of never done. It has this very nasty subjective quality that code doesn't seem to have. See if I can hit a few things. That the way I see people working today, designers used to be work all by themselves, but there's this idea that software we build has to be valuable to the organization building it, usable to its users, and feasible to build given the time we've got. And I most often see designers working in collaborative groups that include product managers, a user experience person, and a lead developer. It means we understand sooner what's feasible, understand sooner what's valuable, and we iterate user experience with that knowledge in our core group. I see us representing our users. I do an awful lot of these very quick, collaborative, lightweight persona sketches. Persona sketches aren't these printed things that we hand out and try and socialize. Rather, they're built together with the team so we all understand. So they may be driven by our research, but they're built quickly and collaboratively. I see a lot of lightweight, quick and dirty guerrilla-style research, and as opposed to traditional user experience design where research was a phase, in the new world, research is not a phase. We always research, we continuously test. Companies like Salesforce.com, for instance, continuously staff and poll people, staff someone to continuously pull people in. There's a guy that I work with that had written a conference paper called 5 Users Every Friday, and they pull in users pretty continuously. We make sense of or model what we understand. This is somebody building something called an experience map. It shows left to right what people are doing, and embedded in it are photos of what we saw and pain points and ideas. And I get known for this thing called a story map, which is a sort of another shape or a variation of that. This is the aftermath of a story map where we spend time discussing what the goals are, why we're building what we're building, who are the users and what they want, and then we talk about or think through a day in the life of someone using this product. And we get things like workflow left to right and details of the discussion building top to bottom. Those all end up being user stories that we can plan with. Let's fast forward to a couple things here. So I can tell a bit of a complete story. The ideation thing, there's a growing use of a practice called design studio. In a design studio, everyone learns about what the problem is, and then everyone sketches their ideas for solutions independently, and then comes back together and shares. And I'm finding more and more companies using this as a consistent practice. We find it's the telling back of our design story that really matters, and getting everyone involved with ideation. I'm finding fidelity on user interface design dropping drastically. We match the fidelity with our certainty. If our certainty is pretty low, so is our fidelity. And we can also drop fidelity when we're collaborating a lot more with others because they know what we mean. Communicating storyboards, things like that, and lower fidelity is a lot more common today than it used to be. And building things like the simple paper prototypes that you saw someone demonstrating are becoming more and more common. It's the marrying the words and pictures, the stories we build with the way we envision the product that's becoming a lot more common. It's the mapping out what the product looks like or feels like at the whole experience level, not story by story, bit by bit, that matters. It's working in these big human-sized chunks, and it's the talking about it that matters. It's It's the telling this product's story. It's the working with others and talking through what we're doing. These are folks at a company called Edmunds.com. It's a US.com that does automotive information, and they'll shut down a month every quarter, well, and now a few weeks every quarter, to run people through what Dan called discovery. Discovery is a common word we use for these, through deliberate discovery phases where they do this kind of design thinking and think it through. And at the end of every week, they hold these big trade shows. And at a trade show, whole teams show what they've been doing. It's more common to see people, whole teams, working in front of whiteboards, talking through who users are, what they do, and how things look. And this isn't an architectural discussion. This is a user experience discussion. So if we pull this all together, what I'm seeing in the future is there's a quote from a lady named Leah Bewley that I like a lot. She just left Adaptive Path, but design isn't something that designers produce. Design is a process that designers facilitate. And what I find user experience practitioners doing is coming up with a practice that involves everyone, but still recognizing that pulling in everyone doesn't mean we're reverting to a design by committee sort of process. We're including everyone, but we're still exercising our design authority. At the end of the day, I wanted you guys to understand that user experience is bigger than you might have thought. It has a pretty vast scope, all the way from deciding what we build all the way through to what we do. I wanted you to understand what user experience practitioners traditionally do, and why they might feel challenged by a lot of agile process or software process in general. And although we had a lot of, we came to, we ran out of time here, I wanted you to see a lot of examples of people working differently. Now, I'm officially 9 minutes and 32 seconds over. Thank you guys very much for your attention.